Kate Falcha, welcome to Irish Granny Helen. We're continuing with our Saturday book, and this week it's Phone Calls from the Dead, Part 2, by D. Scott Rogo and Raymond Bayless, and postscript by Dr. Callum E. Cooper. Oh, this is crooked. Okay, so if you haven't watched video 1, you'll want to go back and watch that because there are some great stories in there, and we're going to continue. We are on chapter 4, the source of the calls. Now this gets a little, let me just put it this way. I hope I explain it properly. Hang on, here we go. Problems and possibilities. So they always were hoping that they could find the intelligence behind these calls and how they're produced on the phone. So they're looking at it from kind of a double-sided question. How do they get it on the phone? Like, is this some sort of technological telephone-ish answer? Or is this purely some sort of psychic energy? And keep in mind, we're talking about rotary phones hooked to your wall and plugged into the house. It's the only kind of phones they had in this book. When we move forward, we're going to be speaking to the author of this book, who wrote the postscript on this book, Dr. Cooper. And I noticed, I just got this today, and I noticed that it does mention cell phones and emails. And so I'm hoping to have read it before I talk with him, but I don't want to promise I am. So much to do. Anyway, let's get to this. To answer the first question, who's behind this? Like, what is going on? They have some ideas. It could be a spirit survival theory. That's what they call it. And it's like the dead are trying to contact the living. Then there's the theory that it's some other invisible entity. Something extra-dimensional being theory is what this is called. A cosmic joke, some kind of tricksters living with us invisibly. That is actually an indigenous belief, so perhaps not as far-fetched as it might feel. And then there's PK from the living theory, which is psychokinetic energy from you. It's like coming from you. It's not actually coming from elsewhere. So do they come from within the recipient, the psychokinetic energy of they call it the witness or the recipient? To begin with, they didn't know what to think, nor did they know how to find out. They were flummoxed. They began by mapping the characteristics of all the calls. They figured if they could do a grid and show all the similarities, differences, etc., maybe a pattern would arrive. So they measured the length of the calls, the number of words spoken, the time of day the calls were received, and then I wrote, etc. They're collecting data, statistics, data. Then they said, okay, so keep in mind, this is the late 70s. There are 2 types of parapsychologists. I don't know if that's true. Today, we're going to have to ask the good doctor. I'm sure he'll know. So in the late 1970s, there was the survivalists who believed that the dead survive death and can make psychic contact. Now they're talking the soul, not the body, and can make contact. And they call these dead entities theta and agents. Then there's the second theory, which is the anti-survivalists. They don't think the dead survive. They don't believe that there's life after death, and that they think that the living are tricking themselves. So these are the 2 different kinds of parapsychology schools of thought, at least 1979. The book tells about a person whose brother was at war in the Crimea. It's a little while back. His brother had promised to appear to him if he was killed in the war. And one night, the guy woke up to see a luminous shape of his brother in the room with a wound in the temple. And then 10 days later, he learned of his brother's death, and it was the day that he had this apparition. And remember, the Crimea, I mean, they didn't have telephones or anything like that. So the survivalists would say that this was his dead brother's spirits. The anti-survivalists would say the witness received some kind of telepathic message about the death of his brother and had a vision, but not a visitation. Subtle difference there. Therefore, this is a psychic phenomenon that's a product of his own mind. So how would this work at the phone? Let's apply this to the telephone. The phone at the time of the book, I don't know how it works now. Don't even ask me. I'm not even going to pretend I have any idea how cell phones work. I do believe it's magic. So, okay. The phone in 1979, it translates voice vibrations to electrical impulses that are sent by the wire. And the recipient doesn't really hear your voice. It hears electrical impulses that mimic your voice. It receives through the wire these electrical impulses. Then they say, you know, we all have some sort of ESP potential ability to pick up information in our unconscious mind, a bit like radar, like receiving radar. Stefan Schwartz would call this the information in the field. Carl Jung would call it the collective unconscious. The ancients called it the ether. It's the soup of all potential happenings, past, present, and future, that we exist in and interact with. Do we all have PK, psychokinetic ability? Are we all able to send? It seems like most people can receive, but can we all send? Whether we know we're doing it or not, I think, is the crucial thing to remember. So a gambler who said that he could control the fall of the dice was researched, and they saw that, yes, actually, most people do have the ability to some degree, and this guy could control the fall of the dice and could even interfere with electrical systems. For example, poltergeist activity. It's usually associated with an emotionally unstable teenager. And they kind of know now that poltergeist activity is just this energy, this extreme psychokinetic energy that's going out from the field of the, I wouldn't say disturbed, that's kind of pathological, upset teenager. And it affects things around them. But PK strongly affects electrical stuff. So we're talking about energy fields. So to me, this makes sense. And it could affect a phone, because a phone, at that time anyway, was working on energy like electricity. It could be a projection of our own mind, or it could be coming from the dead right before death as they think of you. That's also a possibility. That would be PK, but it would be coming right before they were dead and wasn't their dead spirit connecting with you. So you received a telepathic message and you did it, or you received a telepathic message right before they died. Is this a way to prove immortality to ourselves? Are we getting ahead of ourselves here? Are there different causes of these similar calls? So I don't think I could research this stuff. I don't think I could come up with the questions. Are they caused by thought forms, psychic entities created by our own minds, strong PK powers, kind of a mind ghost coming out of us? Are we on the phone talking to a dissociated part of our own minds? That in itself is a trip. That's weird. Some calls are too specific, and the facts that the receiver gets, the receiver didn't know. So is the receiver picking up those facts in the ether and then spitting them back out to itself in the form of this call? The two authors, they disagreed about all of this with each other and took opposite sides of the argument, which is great for research. Some calls felt like tricks because the voice never admitted that it was dead. It let people think they were really speaking with a live person. Why is that? Does the dead person know it's dead? I mean, if it is a dead person. So they discovered that if the recipient didn't know that the person was dead, the call could be longer. Why was that? If they knew that the caller was dead, the call was shorter. Is this because of the shock of realizing it's a dead caller and it interferes with the state of mind necessary to keep the psychic connection going? So this theory agrees with the spiritist theory. It's coming from a dead person, and the caller realizes, oh my God, this person's dead, and it's a shock and it cuts it short. Or did the dead pretend to be alive in order to keep the recipient on the call? Most of these calls happen on or close to the time of death. Most of them, but not all of them. An old study had found that when people saw apparitions of loved ones, it was usually within the first 24 hours of the death of the loved one. And most don't know that the relative had just died. So, their mother will be in the room. Mother lives elsewhere. They don't know the mother has just died, and they'll either see or even interact and then find out the next day the person's gone. This is called crisis cases. Later, these studies were corroborated. They were able to verify that the timing was such that the person really was dead, the recipient really didn't know. Okay. So they created 5 categories, and here they are. The crisis calls, like we just talked about, the shock. Postmortem calls received within 7 days after death. Calls within 30 days. Calls within 2 to 6 months. And calls after 6 months. Their data didn't agree with earlier studies. They found that most calls were within a week of death or after 1 month. So if they didn't come in a week, it was less likely they'd hear from them until a month had gone by. There was a space of time. 3-ish weeks, unless it's February, 3-ish weeks that they probably wouldn't be hearing anything. So this supports the theta agent theory that this is really a dead spirit. An anxious relative is more likely to get a call right away if it's from its own mind, what they're presuming. Now we're on chapter 5, the source of the calls, communication from the dead, question. So they noted that calls arrived on special days of meaning to the dead when they were alive, and they call these anniversary calls. Listen, if you forget to buy me a card, it's okay. You don't need to visit me from the grave. It's a little weird. Okay, Mrs. P was sad on the first birthday after her son's death, and she had prayed that she would talk again with him. That morning she got a call, and the voice on the phone just said Mom in the son's voice. Her husband was there. He heard it and saw it. Then there's Mrs. C. This is 1943. She was relaxing 6 months after her daughter, who was 12, had died. She got a call. It was the long distance operator. The operator said, I have a call for you, and connected her. And it was the voice of her daughter, and the voice said, hello, Mom, how are you? Can you hear me? Absolutely her daughter's voice. She said there was a lot of background interference, like technical interference. She told the operator, this must be for somebody else, because, her daughter was dead. And the operator said, you are 100% the one I was asked to connect you to. She asked the operator, the call ended, and she asked the operator to trace the call. And, I guess maybe the call ended and she called back and asked the next operator to trace the call. And the operator said there was never any call. No record. Crisis calls have strong motivation on the part of the caller, the potentially dead person, to connect with the recipient. The caller is aware of our emotional needs or thoughts, perhaps. It seems planned, timed. There's a special effort to do it on special days, these anniversary calls. Or does the mental state of knowing it's an important day that's happening trigger the recipient to do a stronger PK force that brings a call about? If so, why don't they happen all the time? Which is true, they don't happen all the time. Why can't we produce calls from the living that we want to speak with? Why can't we just go, he was cute. Call me, call me, call me, call me. I don't know. So the anniversary calls suggest the need for a certain frame or state of mind of the recipient. And they're calling this perhaps passive mourning, as in sorrow, not daytime, but passive mourning as in grief. Or do these states of mind summon the dead? If we're really sad, do the dead realize and try to get in touch? Or do both caller and recipient have to be in a certain state of mind and be on the same wavelength? I like that question. Thanatologist, this is somebody who studies death, wrote of the hallucinations of widowhood. And I have heard this before. 47% of people in his study group claimed contact with the dead spouse some years after the death. Some telepathically contacted, they didn't see, they heard, and others had visits, visions, or physical. In 1971, this was confirmed by the work done by a University of Massachusetts professor. It was statistically true that this happened. They appear to be of great comfort to the recipient. They're not frightening. It seems the dead harbor a desire to contact the living, and it can last for a very long time. But as soon as contact is made, this desire to be in contact is satisfied. Then there's the issue of calls that have other voices in the background, multi-voiced, or the person calling, the ostensibly dead person calling, refers to they. They made me do it. They encouraged me to do it. They told me it would happen. Alfred Hitchcock tells this story, so, take it with a block of salt. It's Alfred Hitchcock. A 20-year-old was working on a cruise ship, and he got off in San Francisco with none of his personal belongings. And although he had written a cheery letter to his parents that morning, he was never seen again. I guess he left the letter in his cabin. 6 days later, he was fished from the bay. But the day before he was found, his mother got a phone call. It's a whole story here. Arne Gandy's, this is his name, Arne Gandy's mother had been hoping for a call from him, so she wasn't alarmed when the telephone rang at 3 o'clock in the morning, January 1934. In San Francisco, across the continent, it was midnight, so she was somewhere else. She got out of bed, hurried to the phone. This all just seems so old. When she picked up the receiver, she was surprised to hear a strange man's voice. The man said to her, "The kid is here, and for God's sake, forgive him and give him another chance," he was saying. What I said about him in my letter is all true. He's a fine kid. Okay, what's going on? Who is this? The next morning, she gave the police the account of this. She said, "I asked who's speaking, and he replied with a hollow laugh. I told him he must have the wrong number, that I had no letter. I asked what number he was calling, and he repeated our number, which is unlisted. There were several voices behind him. All seemed to come from another part of the room. I could not understand what he was saying. Oh," I said, "let me talk to my boy." She heard what he was saying. She just didn't understand what he meant. "Let me talk to my boy." There was a lot of laughter, and the strange voice said, "Your son is in a hospital in San Francisco. He's in bad shape, but never mind. He's on his way home now." "I'm helpless," another voice said. "Here I lie, propped up in pillows. I can't move." Then there's a sigh, a groan, and the voice faded like music, and the other voices came over the phone, and then everything stopped. She says, "I jiggled the receiver, got the operator. She told me the call came from San Francisco. My husband immediately contacted the police. Next morning, his body was found in San Francisco Bay. He must have drowned at least 2 days before the coroner estimated, yet she insisted she had heard his voice on the phone." What was that all about? There's no evidence once he got off the boat where he went, why, what happened to him. They just don't know. It's unlikely that his mother used PK to place the call to herself First of all, there were too many mocking voices, and she didn't get to really talk with her son. She heard his voice in the background, and the call was misleading, and he wasn't okay. He was dead. So just the whole thing was weird. To explain multiple voices, consider the channel of communications, or it's an opening, a portal for other souls too. So it creates kind of a window that anyone can shout in. It's like if you were talking to somebody through the window in your house, people walking by could perhaps comment and be heard. H.P. Lovecraft wrote the Dunwich Horror. On rare occasions, a caller has, I guess, I didn't pursue more about that, but I guess maybe this is the situation in that book. On rare occasions, the caller has a vital message. For example, a secretary was finishing the talk of conveying the message. Remember, the doctor went on vacation. The secretary had elective surgery. She died, but she called the insurance guy on Monday morning, the day of her funeral. So there's strong evidence here of survival. Mrs. P is an example. Her aged mother died, and Mrs. P was worried about her 17-year-old grandson, Scott, who was, quote unquote, a hellraiser. And after his grandmother died, well, because his great-grandmother, his mother's grandmother, his own great-grandmother died, he got more reckless, more of a problem. His parents decided to send him to Hawaii to live with his biological father because he was living with his mother and stepfather. The night they came to that decision, Mrs. P got a late-night call. Her dead grandmother was looking for the boy's mom. Mrs. P was so surprised. She said, "Mom, why are you," this is her own mother called, and she was looking for the boy's mom. And she's so surprised. She said, "Mom, why are you calling so late at night?" And the mother said, "I can't reach Corinne, and I've been trying for a couple of days. Tell Scott no. Tell him no. Write it down. Tell him no." And the phone went dead. So this is the mother of I'm uncertain about the relationships here. Anyway, Mrs. P wrote it down, and she went back to sleep. And the next morning, she was shocked. She remembered the call. Okay, this is why I'm confused. Her mother was dead. She was very confused when she woke up. She realized, I talked to my dead mother. What? And the handwriting on the pad of paper by the bed was her mother's writing, not her own. She had taken the message from her dead mother on the phone. She had written it down, and yet it was the mother's writing, not Mrs. P's. She had no doubt about the voice. And shortly after this, Scott died in a reckless accident. So what was going on here was the call PK because of Mrs. P's worry about Scott. But it's not easily explained. Why is the handwriting identical? They noted that often the phone was the people's chief form of communication with each other in life, and then these calls from the dead continued that comfortable means of communication. One author tells of his own attempt to call a relative while he himself was in an out-of-body experience. And he, he kind of came out of his body and then decided to call a relative and went over to a phone to call because that's how he was used to communicating. So Mrs. P had known and roomed with Ida Lupino. Now, Ida Lupino is the star that I think her father was a director or a producer. And she was the star who, as a child, picked up the phone to that phone call, if you remember from last time. So Lupino got a call from her father 6 months after his death. He had died in the bombing of London during the war. In the call, he told her where to find important papers, a will or deeds. They had been hidden and they were buried under rubble in the cellar, and no one in the family knew where they were. They didn't know where to look in the rubble. So Lupino freaked out. They found the papers right where he said they would be. Now, Mrs. P was there and witnessed this call, the whole thing. Lupino also answered, she's also the one who answered the call from the dead as a child. The case of the woman's sister and two others who saw an apparition of her dead that same day that they saw the apparition was the funeral, her dead husband. So he stood in his hospital gown. He looked awful. All four of them, she and her sisters, all of them saw him, and he disappeared. That night, the phone rang, and one of the sisters answered, and Mary, I have something to tell you, he said for the wife. And the sister dropped the phone out of shock. And when they picked the phone up again, it was dead. So he called on the phone that night of his funeral. Chapter 6, the mechanics of the calls. How did the dead do it? And it would just be a guess. They don't know. At least they didn't in 1979. I don't know if they figured it out. Are they incoming? Is it a call from far, routed through the phone exchange, whatever that was, to the caller? Or do they arrive from the recipient's phone? Are they only starting at the phone that they pick up, or do they come all the way through the wire? If the former, then the cause would be electromagnetic phenomena, and this is the electromagnetic theory. If the latter, it's starting in the phone in your hand, it's a paraphysical theory, a disembodied voice created out of thin air. Do the dead manipulate electrical currents, or are they speaking to us directly? Or can it be either way? Or does it matter? I don't know. Some do seem to genuinely go through an operator because they get calls from, in the old days, calls from the international operator and long distance operator. And there is evidence of this. In some such calls, all the extensions in the house rang at the same time. I don't know if younger people would remember, but when you had a phone number and you had an extension in another room, if a call came into that number, all the phones attached to that number would ring. You can't manipulate this from inside the house. So it wasn't coming just from one instrument. Either it came from outside, or it was PK force from the person or the theta agent inside that affected all the phones in the house. That would be quite a trick. If from the outside, then the voice is the result of the phone electrical system. So some came through long distance operators, which is even stranger. And the fact that there was no bill and no record, that blows your mind. Some recipients heard click when the call was over, meaning the call came from outside the house. Many seem to originate in the phone itself. They got technical help from an industrial consultant who was also a psychic to investigate this. He suggested it was not PK, but directly from the dead, because the phone rings were some kind of odd quality. Although most calls had regular rings, and I wrote in parentheses, this is very dated, but it's interesting. For example, the case of a young German man in 1978. The phone rang, but it sounded odd. It didn't sound like its usual ring. He picked it up, and the phone sounded dead, the dead air. And then he heard his father, who died 4 years earlier, and the voice said, "I'm here, Daddy. I'm here, Daddy. How's Mommy?" Then it was gone. Ooh. The wife witnessed this whole thing, and her husband couldn't speak afterwards. So I don't think it was her husband. I think it was her son that answered the phone, and his father had died. And this was his mother was with him, and the call came in. The call that was made 2 days before the death of the person who was in the hospital dying. In 1954, a call began with a couple of weird rings, and then there'd be nobody on the line, and people would say, oh, it was a malfunction. And then it would call again from a friend who was in the hospital, but unable to converse. Tom kept asking, are you there? Are you there? And then hung up. But he was in a semi-coma in the hospital and didn't have access to a phone and wasn't able to talk. And yet when they picked up this weird ringing phone, he said, "Are you there? Are you there?" And he hung up. Later, they found out he actually had died several hours before the call came in. These phone calls can end in a click and a dial tone. They can stay open or just go dead. Witness hang-ups often end the call. The caller has been silent and they just hang up because they're not getting anything. So Ida Lupino, she must have been psychic, I don't know. In 1929, she had an Uncle Andy who was a close friend of her father's, close friend of the family. And she was asleep. This is interesting. She was asleep while her parents were working one night. Her grandmother was babysitting her. And she was awakened by an apparition. It was Uncle Andy. She went out to the kitchen to tell her grandmother, I just saw Uncle Andy. And the phone rang in the kitchen. Her grandmother was in the kitchen. She walks out in the kitchen. It's the middle of the night. The phone rings. And it's Uncle Andy asking to speak to the father, who's not there yet. Uncle Andy says, this is terribly important. So the grandmother said into the phone, Andy, are you ill? He didn't sound right. And the phone went dead. So this was before direct dial even. This was 1929. You pick up the phone and talk to the operator, and the exchange operator would connect you. So the grandmother called the exchange only to be told, no call came in on your phone that night. The parents came home, and they were told the story, and the father was shocked. And then he sat everybody down and he said, look, I didn't tell you this because I didn't want to upset you, but Andy did himself in the other day, 3 days before. Then we have an anonymous case. Women in a San Francisco hotel, they were on vacation, and at 5:30 in the morning, the phone rang. And this woman answered it. It was her aunt, and she could only say a couple of words, and then the phone went dead. So the woman called the hotel operator to complain. The phone went dead, and, I only got a couple of words out of that conversation. And she was told by the operator, there have been no calls made through this switchboard in the past 5 hours. So 3 hours later, her husband called long distance to tell her her aunt had died. And she died at 5:30 at the same time that call came into the hotel room. There's no way this call had gone directly to the room from somewhere else. It had to go through the, that switchboard thing. So it had to be a psychic effect in the phone itself. At first, they thought maybe calls were electromagnetic, some kind of effect. Then they decided that most were paraphysical. Somehow a voice was produced with the microphone or the amp in the mouthpiece. There was a 1956 experiment to try to catch dead voices on tape. This is electronic tape. It was done by scientists with a psychic from 56 to 65, and then the authors got involved from 68 to 75. In retrospect, this study provided partial explanations for the phone calls. They went back and looked. In 1959, a guy named Jorgensen, who was a filmmaker, claimed to have taped the voices of the dead in experiments. In 1968, a guy called Raudiv, I think, a scholar, said that he replicated those results and had been able to communicate electronically with the dead. He just sat with an open microphone and a tape running and asked the dead out loud to speak some specific questions. And there was a group of people in the room asking questions for him. And on the tape, you could hear the extra voices or whispers calling the names of people in the group. So one person would ask a question, then they'd all sit silently. And they would get this weird feedback of whispers and something on the tape calling the people's names. And the voices that spoke on the tape claimed that they were dead. Sometimes they hooked the tape up to the radio, which was problematic because they got interference from other stations. Jorgensen's book got absolutely no notice, but the second book did because lots of testimony was in it from scientists, recording engineers, and the publisher, who himself claimed that he had replicated the tests. So that book was a sensation, and tons of pushback came from parapsychologists. Oh, these voices are too faint. Oh, the background noise is bad. But Rowdy said he was hearing things, picking up commercials. He was told he was hearing things, picking up commercials or broadcasts from somewhere else. He died in 1974 of a heart attack and had actually been there actually had been a discovery of tape recorded voices before both of these other experiments by accident in 1956. And the person who was able to catch these voices published about it in 58, but it was completely ignored. Bayless, one of the authors of the book, met a guy who was a psychic, and I'm going to butcher his name, I know. It's Szalay. I'm going to call him Szalay. Szalay told Bayless of the voice he heard in the air. He had then recorded these voices that he heard in the air on 78s, remember 78, in 1941. And he tried, but he didn't have a lot of luck. So they tried tape instead in 1956, and they got something. They published about it, and they did their publishing shortly before Jorgensen did his publishing. What they published describes the process, and it's really boring and complicated, and people probably couldn't relate to it. It got a little too technical. They found they could record voices onto tape that weren't heard in the room. Szalay recognized one of the voices as an old girlfriend. The voices would answer questions about other people. The answers were not known by those people in the room. So the answers were not coming from the minds of the people in the room. They had no knowledge of them. Bayless, the author, at home with his wife, complained that he'd like to be a recluse. Szalay, 15 miles away, was fooling around with tape at the time, and it recorded Bayless as virtually becoming a recluse. So is he picking this up in his mind and transferring it to the tape? The author worked with Szalay on these experiments, and he got voices on tape, and someone heard it was sometimes they were heard in the room, and sometimes they were only heard on the tape. And sometimes the voices recorded even when the men weren't paying attention. They were distracted. They'd go back later and there would be voices. As years of experiments progressed, the voices became clearer and talked louder and longer. Some began to identify themselves. Critics say, oh, it's just the radio, it's airplanes flying overhead. But these voices answered questions directed to them and called the experimenters by name. So it's not somebody flying overhead if they can call you by name. The voices can be distinct or loud, faint or hard to hear. The quieter ones are hard to decipher, and different people interpret what they're saying differently. But there's no doubt, it's like those spirit voice boxes that people carry into haunted houses, and they say, oh, listen, they said, help me, I'm locked up in this other room. Yeah, you can't really tell what they're saying. But there's no doubt about some of these voices that they got on tape. He uses the trouble transcribing the Watergate tapes as an example that this is normal with recordings. People don't always hear the same thing, listening to the same thing. They interpret it differently. Their ears hear it differently. He says the tape recorded voices are an independent line of evidence that the calls are a manipulation of the electronic equipment itself. They often sound like the people that they claim to be are recognized by somebody in the group. So there is that. But is this from the dead, or is it PK from the people in the group? Many cases of the voices being recognized occur, but the listener is not knowing that the person is dead when they hear the voice. They'll say, oh, that's my friend Joe. And then they'll find out later that Joe died. They didn't know. It seems like independent intelligence, not from the minds of the living when that happens. But how did the voices get on the tape? Did PK, psychokinetic energy from the people, mediate into the electromagnetic energy and put it on the tape? Paraphysically, were they put on the tape and not heard by human ears, but they happen from elsewhere? It's the same question that they're asking about the phone calls. So they tested it by leaving the tape on, the mic open, but covering the mic to block the sound going in. So it shouldn't have been able to pick up anything because it was blocked, hidden. They still recorded voices. With the phone calls, evidence involving the technological part of the phone calls, the exchanges, etc., lend to the conclusion that the calls are paraphysical, created in the phone's mouthpiece. But William Welch, a Hollywood screenwriter, disagrees. He said he found voices on yet unused tape. I tried to fit it into too small a space. I couldn't read it. Tape that had not been used yet, fresh tape. And he said that electromagnetic effect was an anomaly, maybe. The author argues that there are two mechanisms of voices. The dead manipulate the electromagnetic component, and or they are psi, PK. So the question is, are the dead always trying to contact us? I find that is a really interesting question. Is any way that they can contact us possible? Maybe the phones are just one sort of attempt. Are the dead making concerted efforts to contact us all the time and they've stumbled on the phone thing? What about telegraph, radio, and radar? Have those been used to make contact? With the invention of every new mode of communication, there's always a flurry of excitement when someone believes he's using it to communicate with the dead. We've heard of a few incidents in which the telegraph rattled out a Morse code warning that prevented disaster to a ship or a train, and then there was no human at the sending end of the apparatus. Occasionally, there's an account of someone who is sure he has spoken to a deceased relation or friend on the telephone. Even television has had one or two flings of producing evidence of survival. Let me see here how we're doing. Okay, I think I'm going to have to end this here because it's the end of the chapter, and the next chapter is really long. So this is the end of number 2. And we will start video number 3 with chapter 7. So I told you it was a little confusing. I think it would be very hard to study this, hard to remain open-minded and not skeptical, but hard to not also fall for it. And it might be very difficult. And the technicalities of how it works are difficult to understand. But there's no proof is part of the problem. So your homework for tonight is to experiment with this yourself. And if you find that I've called you in the middle of the night, check with my husband, make sure I'm okay. So thank you very much for watching. I know this is a little bit short, but it's awkward where this is ending. So I hate to do that, but I'll be back and we'll have more of the book. We'll finish it up. In the meantime, slán go fóill, slánte.